Hello and welcome back to another episode of TACHES Teaches. I'm Tash, and in today's video I'd like to talk a little bit about the magical world of comparators. So without further ado, let's jump right in and I'll show you what I'm talking about. The category of module I'd like to look at today is the comparator. If you go down to the last category here, logic, and we scroll to the right, you can see that we've got 6 what are called comparators. And quick note before we dive into this, you'll notice that every other module in this category is only yellow. And I'm not sure if any of you remember from my earlier videos on sort of the basics of the grids, what the different colours mean. Yellow means that we're dealing with logic signals. So either 0 or 1, yes or no, on or off. It's sort of two choice incomes and outcomes. And the red is untyped, and untyped means that it could be a variety of sources. So it could be audio, or it could be LFO rate modulation, or it could be gate signals going in, but it basically means that you can put anything into it. And if we see on the right-hand side, you can see that we've got a yellow port, and that just means that whatever you feed into it, it doesn't matter what kind of thing you're feeding into it, you will get either a on or an off state. And that's why these what would seem to be quite mathematical functions aren't in the maths group, they're in the logic group, because it doesn't matter what you're putting into it, you will get a logic signal out, a gate signal or a trigger signal or an on-off state. So I thought that's important to note first of all. So what is a comparator? Well, in its essence, a comparator is just a device that allows you to compare two things. And after having completed that comparison, give us either a yes or no answer. So I think one of the best ways to visualize this is, of course, with an oscilloscope. And what we're going to do is we're going to compare an LFO. So we're going to take a triangle LFO and we'll pop that into this top view here. And then we're also going to take just a value knob, and that will allow us to assign a fixed value. And we're going to put it to 50%. So you can see that this red line is now perfectly intersecting this LFO halfway between 0 and 1, which is the minimum and the maximum of this waveform. Now what a comparator can do is we can say, or we can pose the question to the comparator, how often is the LFO above this value line? So for that we're going to use a greater than. So let's take this greater than module here, and we're going to say, how often is this top LFO greater than this bottom fixed value of, I suppose, 0.5 you'd call it. Let's take another oscilloscope, and you'll see that interestingly, and if I bring this down here in fact, yeah, does that work? And let's also just pop that in there and that in there. There we go. Nice. So you can see that for all of the portion that the LFO is above the red line, we have a gate signal now. We have something on. And you'll notice that as I start to move this value line up and down, we're going to change the length of that gate message, because obviously there will be more or less time that the LFO spends above or below the threshold. So let's bring this down first, and you'll see that we're now going to end up with a lot wider of gate signals. And we can see, again, the reason that is because the only portion of the LFO below our target threshold is this tiny little bit here, which therefore counts for this dip in the gate. However, if we were to go the opposite way and start bringing it up closer to that top line, we have the opposite. So now we're ending up with quite short gate signals. Okay, so we don't always have to compare two things to fixed values. We could compare two different LFOs. So first of all, let's just make these so they are identical. So I'm going to put that in there, and let's just change the color to something different. And let's put that in there as well. Restart them so they're at the same point. What's going on? I've lost my caps lock. Okay, there we go. So now we have both of them running at the same time, and therefore there is no point that this LFO is above this LFO. Therefore, we have a low logic output, and that just means that we have no gate signal. However, if I were to change this so this LFO ran at double the speed, we would then assume that we would end up with gate signals. So let's try that. So now that we have this running at double speed, you can see that we now have an on and off gate signal, where the off signal is shorter than the on. However, if we were to change that around, so going back to how it was before, this now being half the speed, now we've ended up with the gate signal being off longer than it's on. And of course, we don't have to compare the same waveform. We could compare, say, a sawtooth to the triangle wave, and we could make them some unusual timing rate. So let's put this at 3/4 of a quarter note. And this one, let's put it to be 1.25, so 1 1/4 quarter notes, and let's restart that. So now we're ending up with some really rather interesting patterns. Also, now that we know that this is outputting a logic signal or a gate signal, it's fairly obvious that we can now use this to drive an envelope. So let's take a sine wave, and I'm going to use an ADSR here because I want to have the sustain. If I were to use an AD, it doesn't matter how long the gate signal we're feeding it is, the actual length of the note won't vary. So let's now use this output to control the ADSR, and let's make the sustain a bit longer. In fact, let's make the decay longer and the sustain shorter. There we go. So let's take an audio out now, and let's listen to what's happening. So that's really quite cool, I think. The way that we've managed to now create quite a moving, pulsing feeling by just comparing waveforms, I think is fantastic. We could try again and make a little bit more changes to this waveform to see what kind of sounds come through those changes. So let's... So as we start to bring a bit more chaos into it, starting to create more gate signals. And obviously if I were to play this in context with a metronome, it doesn't sound particularly good, and that's quite obviously because we're not really quantizing this to anything. So what we could do is clock quantize the output. So let's take our clock quantize, put it on triggers mode because we have some short values in there. And now let's take a triggers and put this to 16. Let's quantize it to 16th notes. And in theory, when I press play now, let's modify the LFO a bit. So you can see here, we're now comparing a rather simple wave to something a bit more radical. For the sake of going even weirder, let's also just add some odd modulation to the shape of this. Let's add another LFO, changing the speed of that one. Okay, cool. So now we know how to use comparators to create gate signals. Why don't we try and see what other uses we can find for these relatively simple devices? Well, one thing that I think is particularly cool about this less than and more than features is that we don't have to use this for waves in the sense of creating gate signals. We can use them for comparing pitch as well. So I'm just going to put this back to an AD because I prefer the sound of it. And I'm going to show you what you can do with the less than in tandem with talking about pitch. So I'm going to take two different waveforms here. Let's have a sawtooth and a sine. So two quite different waveforms. And what I'd like to do now is to create a way that whenever I play notes upwards, i.e. whenever the next note I play is higher than the previous note, we're going to play on the sawtooth. However, when I descend with my notes, i.e. whenever a note I play is lower than the last one I've just played, I'd like it to play on the sine wave. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to be comparing pitch. So let's take this pitch module. This is just the pitch in. So whatever key... Oh, shit, let me turn this down. So whenever I press a note, if I put in a value readout here so we can see it, whenever I press a note, we can see what note I'm pressing. Therefore, we now have pitch information being brought in aside from these pre-chords. So what I want to do is I want to compare the pitch now the pitch in the present with the pitch very recently ago, so the pitch in the past. And the way that we're going to be doing that is, again, by using a less than. So we're going to say, is the pitch now less than the same pitch was shortly ago? So there's one part missing to that, and that is a way to reference the past. And we're going to use a little delay module here, and we're going to make it as short as it can go without being a 0, which is 0.01. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pitch into there as well, and then we're going to compare the pitch with itself 0.01 milliseconds ago. And it stands to reason that if I then keep playing the same note, we're not going to get a gate signal, because it's only when the note is less than it previous was will we get a gate signal. So let me just prove that to you as well. And I'm going to do the C major scale upwards here. Nothing. However, as I start to play down, if I put this on fast mode, as I start to play down, we're getting gate signals. But as I go up, nothing. Down, gate signals. So what we're going to do now is we're going to say, okay, well, let's use, instead of the pre-chord for the gate, we're going to use the pre-chord for, in fact, let's do this way. So I'm going to split it, and I'm going to say, when the pitch is less than it was a millisecond ago, trigger this AD. And then let's just copy and paste this up here, and all we need to do is now swap this for a greater than, and we're going to use the greater than to trigger this bottom one. In fact, I wanted it to do it the other way, didn't I? I wanted it to be low on the other side, so let's swap these out. Okay, cool. So now, in theory, these gate signals that are going to be triggering these notes aren't coming from the pre-chord, and we have nothing else other than the pitch value then being compared with the pitch value it was shortly ago, and that's what's creating the gates. So let's try and ride up here. We're going to do up the C major scale first. And let's go down. Let's go up. So this is quite cool, because obviously as you're playing melody, we're now creating a sort of split. And this can be very handy as well for when you're using sort of generative patches, because we don't necessarily need to be defining the pitch ourselves. We could swap this out with something. So let's take a dice module, and let's scale this into maybe 2 octaves. So we'll go from C3 to C5, and we need our trusty quantizer. And let's make a nice pentatonic scale here. So let's just leave it as is. And let's use, in fact, a trigger to, not to obviously be triggering these notes, but to be triggering this dice. So let's put that to 8th notes, and let's just see what we get now. Now, it's important to note, obviously, that we're not getting any pitch changes here. So we're going to need to now take the output of this pitch quantizer and put this into our sine waves as well. And, sorry, sawtooth. Let's filter these a bit, because they do sound a bit... So we're now creating this rather interesting split where some notes are on one oscillator and some are on the other, just based on how high or low they are compared to the last played note. I think that's rather marvelous. Another great use of comparators is aiding us in our quest for delicious generative patches, where oftentimes, if we've restricted the possible notes that a randomized sequence can give us, we will end up with repeated notes. And by repeated notes, I mean the same note played multiple times in a row. That's not to say that that's a bad thing. A lot of good melodies do repeat themselves or hang on a single note before going up and down. But in the context of a generative patch, at times it would be nicer for, instead of there being a repeated note, to have a pause or a rest instead. So instead of playing 6 Cs in a row, maybe we get 1 C followed by 5 rests. Now, I've patched in a very simple just dice module here to a pitch scaler, restricting it to 1 octave, and then we have 3 possible notes. So we're going to be getting 16th notes triggering this AD, and there are only 3 possible notes, which means that we will end up with a lot of repeats. Let's have a quick listen. We'll bring that delay down a bit. Now, what I'd like to achieve with our comparator is that if we don't change note, we don't get a gate signal. And we're going to do that by comparing the pitch with itself again, but we're going to be comparing it with a not equals. So let's just get our delay ready and put this down to its lowest value. So if we compare the pitch now with the pitch 0.1 milliseconds ago and say, is it not equal to what it was 0.1 milliseconds ago, we're only going to get a gate signal when that's true. So we're only going to get a gate signal when the note is different. Now let's use that output to be what drives our AD rather than the triggers. And if I press play now, you'll notice that we have a lot more of a broken up rhythm. Comparing that to this. And that's obviously because if it stays on a note, even if it triggers 5 times, we're not going to be getting a new gate signal to open that envelope until the note changes. So this can be incredibly useful for when you start making it, let's give it a bit more space. Let's say C3 to C5, 2 octaves of 5 notes. We're going to be getting less repeats now, and that's just because there are more choices. But when we do get a repeat, we'll get a brief respite, a brief break in that, and that can sound really quite wonderful. As opposed to because those repeated notes don't sound that cool, whereas these gaps now really cool. Now if we just go back to the previous setup I had going here, let's get rid of that. We can see as well that we have a similar setup here without having set that up. And that is because of the fact that the only time we're getting gate signals is when a note is either less than or greater than. But we have no setup here for what to do if a note is the same. Therefore, if we get repeated notes here, if we shrink this down as well, we have the same sort of setup, because if a note repeats, it is neither less than or greater than the previous note. So there are multiple ways around that. Another great use for comparators with using the equals is, let's load up a new grid patch here, is allowing us to basically assign different note pitches to different oscillators. And I'm just going to quickly pick 7 oscillators. So 4, 5, 6, 7. So let's change these all. So we've got a sine, we'll do a pulse, we'll do a sawtooth, we'll do a triangle, we'll do a wavetable, we'll do another wavetable, and we'll do a swarm. And let's just pick different wavetables here. Sines by octave and tundra. Nice. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to compare the incoming pitch to a variety of fixed pitches, and from there, then use that to trigger the individual sine waves. So the first thing we need to do is we need to bring the pitch in. And we're going to be comparing the notes played on our keyboard to a variety of fixed pitches. So next up, let's take a pitch module. And let's just put in 1 octave. So we'll go for C3 up to B3. So we've got a C3, a D3, we've got an E, and then we've got an F. Scroll down a bit, come on. We've got a G, and an A, and finally we've got our B down here. And just for the hell of it, in fact, let's make it a full octave, so we'll go for the C above it as well. And we'll change that to be another wavetable. Let's go for clavinet. Nice. Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to compare this incoming pitch to these pitches. And the way that we're going to do that is by using an equals module. So we can put one of those after each of these pitch devices. And we're going to say, is the incoming pitch equal to C3? If so, do this. Is the incoming pitch equal to D3? So let's just patch these in quickly. Da, 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 da. Nice. Okay, so as I now play the keyboard, let's just make sure I'm in the right register. Am I? Okay, that's a C2. Okay, we need a C3 now. Okay, cool. So what we need to do is we need to turn off these pre-chords for the gates because we don't want to be triggering these notes with our keyboard. We want to be triggering them with the comparation of pitch. So now if I press a note, we're not going to get anything. But as I now as I press a C, for example, you can see that we're now lighting up here. As I press the D, we're lighting up here, E here. So let's now take the outputs of these and plug those to be our gate drivers. Fantastic. So as I now play up and down the keyboard, let's zoom out a bit. Cool, so we're now being able to control these individual notes, but we do face a similar problem. If I play up and down, we're fine, but if I repeat a note, it doesn't work. And that's because once the pitch has been accepted as equal, we have just a gate message going out, and it doesn't turn off again. So we need to find a way to be able to compare the pitch, but also add in another factor. And the best way to do that is to use the gate in as well. So we're going to say, is the pitch equals to C? Yes, then trigger the first oscillator. However, if the pitch is equal to C and we press another C, we still don't have anything to re-trigger it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take an AND module. We're going to bring in another form of logic here, and we're going to say, is the pitch equals to C? If yes, and we have a gate signal, trigger the note. So now as I play C's in a row, because the answer to is the pitch equals C3 stays true, all we then need is for the other part to be true, which is there to be a gate signal. So as I hold the note, you can see that we're lit, and as I press it fast and longer and shorter, that means that we can now create, if I were especially to change this to ADSRs, we can now create different gate lengths. So let's change all of these to ADSRs, in fact. And all we need to do now is set up the same AND functions for all of the other devices. So let's just copy and paste these down here. Nice, nice, and nice. Patch those in there. A lot of these patches, you do seem like you're spending a hell of a lot of time just dragging cables back and forth. But you know that's the fun. That's why we're into it, isn't it? Let's take the output of that guy, and you into there, and the last one. Now all we need to do is, of course, connect these. And last step is to swap these out. Okay. Nice. So now I can play up and down the keyboard. I don't like this swarm. I'm going to swap that for another wavetable. Let's go for a brass step. So if we were to now use an arpeggiator, for example, and I were to hold some note, Oh, I quite like that chord, actually. Let me just record that into a little clip. Nice, we've got our notes. Let's just make this, say, 8 bars long. So now we have individual control of the specific voices playing those notes. So let's open this up again. We can now start to play with, say, the decay of individual notes. So it's important to note that we need to take the pitch off of these and then patch the pitch in here, because otherwise if I press notes we're going to be changing the pitch. So this means that obviously even if the pitch is in E, it won't then play on any other voices. So let's patch all of these in as well. Cool. Let's put a bit of delay, just for good measure. And let's filter low pass. Maybe we can use this to open it a bit. Quite cool. And obviously with a bit of modulation to all of these guys we can create something really quite wild. So let's add a few randoms now. You can use this to control both the filter sounding quite cool. Now let's see what happens when we change note as well. So what is this chord? What have we got here? We've got a C, an E, a G, and a B. So I guess that's a C major 7 with a 6 in it. Let's do also an A. Let's go in here. Let's change that to an A. So we've got an A, C, E, G, B. So let's try this out. Oh, that's cool. Let's make these so that they play after each other. So let's go for play mode from start, next action after 1 bar, play other. Very nice. So what else could we do using the comparators here then? Is there anything else? Well, for starters, this means that of course we can now also change this to be polyphonic. Which means that we can have longer releases. Let's use a few more randoms to change decay length on things. Are there any notes we haven't used? Maybe we can bring one of those in. So we've got here, we could do a C there. Ooh, of course, we need to do a little bit of modulation on these guys. Ooh, that signs by octave one is amazing. Of course, we need to do a little bit on the skew of the sine. Really nice. Why don't we change a couple of the octaves on there? So what about this one? Bit of reverb. Ooh. See what this sounds like. I think what might be quite cool as well is to do some sort of volume randomization. So let's just put, let's just use an attenuator for that. It's probably the quickest way. Let's also just change the ARP to be playing randomly. No, let's put it back. So let's say every time we get a gate signal, let's set up a couple of dice here. Outs. Quite nice. And of course, we don't necessarily have to have these notes that we're comparing them to be the right notes. So if we pause it for a second, I could turn these off, and we could basically just create our own scale based off of the semitone tuning of these guys. So let's just make sure these are all off. So we'll have this be our root, and then let's do a fifth, and then we can do a third. We'll do a minor third up 12, so we'll do 15. Then we can do a 14th. And we can do a minus 1. And we'll do a minus 12 for the sake of it. And let's do a 5 again. We'll do 5, 17. And we'll also do a 24. So we'll go up a whole octave. Let's see what that sounds like now. Quite horrible. So what note is it that's causing that? Let's bring it all down an octave. So obviously, because we've defined the scale by each oscillator being tuned to a different value. Oh! That's amazing. Really cool. Well folks, that's sadly all we have time for today, but I do hope that this video has been useful. If you enjoyed it, then please remember to like, comment and subscribe, and smash that notifications button if you'd like to keep up to date with all of my future videos. If you'd like to take your support a step further, then please consider becoming a patron too. I would also like to remind you that I am a Bitwig certified trainer, in case any of you would like one-to-one tuition. In the meantime, happy Friday and happy creating!